Hello, everyone. If the event started, there's no sound.
Yes, I'm not listening to anything also. Did the event started already? What's going on? Thank you.
What is Africa? Is it the wildlife, the beautiful coasts, thriving cities? It is more than that. It is the people. Our 55 countries have many things in common. Our cultures bind us together. They give us strength and identity. They make us proud. By sharing our knowledge and working together, we're building a new Africa that's driven by investments, by game-changing infrastructure projects, and using transformative technology to change the way we live, work, and conduct business. Using our largest natural resource, our vast arable land, we are making advances in agriculture, developing new industries, creating jobs, and improving livelihoods. Together, we are moving forward on economic integration. By consolidating Africa's significant internal market to foster trade within the continent and with the world, Africa is open for business. We are building the Africa we want. So, what is the continent of the future? The answer is Africa.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you guys hear me just okay? Yeah? All right.
Yes.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mamadou Samba, and I am very honored to welcome you here at the African Youth Leaders Consultative session here at the African Union Mission to the United States. As I said, my name is Mamadou Samba, and I serve as the Executive Director of a think tank called the Pan-African Institute of Municipal Development, which is based in Washington, D.C. And our organization mission works with African municipal governments to support them with capacity building, technical assistance, and leadership development to ensure that those building blocks of good governance are strengthened, but also give you access to citizens to take part in national conversations around policy issues and things that impact them on a day-to-day basis. I'm very honored to be here. I'm certainly not new to this stage and new to this house. Having previously served as the director of the Mayor's Office of African Affairs here in DC, I've supported the African Union mission here in strengthening diaspora outreach, and I'm really glad and honored to be invited here by Ambassador, the Ambassador and Ambassador Hilda Mafudze, all right, and the Youth Ambassador. Chido Pemba to take part in his event. And so it is at the backdrop of the much anticipated US-Africa Summit next week that this event is taking place. And this session will tackle critical topics that are related to the African youth and the diaspora ahead of the summit. Specifically, this consultative session will tackle issues in topics such as climate change, diaspora engagement, promoting youth entrepreneurship and food security, among many other issues that impact the African diaspora. So by the end of this summit, or this session, we are hoping that we will come up with tangible and concrete ideas or recommendations that could be put forward at the end of the US-Africa Summit to ensure that as policies get implemented, the voice of the diaspora is taken into consideration. And so as you can see, from the program that you may have received, we have a very packed event, packed afternoon, so I wouldn't waste any more time getting into it. I do want to take a few seconds to go over the program a little bit. And so we will have a couple of speakers, which I will introduce shortly, and we'll have 3 panel discussions. These are 30 minutes panels, and so the 30 minutes really have to be used as efficiently as possible. And then we'll do a breakout session, and we'll come back here and have presentations from those breakout sessions in terms of the ideas that have been that were shared throughout the breakout session. And so that's the program. Again, thank you for being here. Our first speaker will be Ambassador Hilda Mafudze. And it is my great pleasure to introduce her bio. Is extremely long, so I'm not going to read all of it. She's extremely experienced, over 20 years experience as a in top government positions, including serving in ambassadorial positions in Zimbabwe, Sudan, and South Sudan between 2010 and 2019. I apologize. And most recently, she served as ambassador in the Republic of Malawi. While serving as an ambassador at Malawi, to Malawi, I apologize, she chaired the regional ambassadors group representing the South African Development Community, which is a regional group, a regional economic community comprising of 16 member states. From 2000 to 2005, Ambassador Mofozu served as an elected member of Zimbabwe's parliament, and as one of few women elected officials, she was an influential voice committed to ensuring that Zimbabwe's laws were balanced and served the interests of the poor and other marginalized communities. And Ambassador, it's my honor to be here, and you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. And let me greet you all and welcome you to the Africa House. And members of the African Diplomatic Corps, AU Youth Envoy Chido Pemba, U.S. Embassy to the African Union Commission, Mrs. Heather Thompson, members of AU organs and institutions, Director, Global Leadership, African Wildlife Foundation, and Mr. Edwin Tambara, NGOs, and African diaspora community representatives. All the protocols are observed. A good afternoon and welcome to the Africa House once more. Is a first order of business. Allow me to take this opportunity to thank our AU mission and the Office of the AU Youth Envoy for putting together this forum. I thank you. This forum, which precedes the US African Leaders Summit, comes at a time when youth on our continent are recovering from the impact of the global pandemic. Our youth showed resilience and were part of the measures in the innovative ways to end the pandemic. Some examples of these creative ways are solar-powered water pumps, digital applications which enabled students to continue learning, and online marketplaces which aided income generation during the COVID-19 pandemic. That is why my remarks today will focus on the significance of the African youth, your relevance, the position you hold in our society. Additionally, I will remind us of the measures instituted to nurture this population. My sons and daughters here present, you are the future, and all those who are online, you are the future of our continent, and you have demonstrated such courageous characteristics time and again. One African proverb goes, it is the youth, the young trees that make up the forest. I'm speaking to you as a mother, a representative of the African Union to the USA, and an African citizen. Africa, we and the African Union know you and value your contribution to society. That should be noted. We really value your contribution. And to us, you are the continuum of the future. And we have to nurture you now so that you find the world opening for you. And it could be very easy to sail in because you are already nurtured. Let me restate what the chairperson of the African Union, H.E. Musa Faki Mahamat, said in his vision for his second term as the chairperson of the African Union 2021-2024. I quote, "Young Africans are experiencing uncertainty for their future and are frustrated with the weak content of the intergenerational alternation policies. African youth long for change, innovation, and and the creation. Our duty is to do everything to meet these legitimate aspirations. In its essence, the action of the organization must consider these essential demands of freedom, modernity, emancipation, change, education, health, employment, and the physical, moral, and intellectual development. That is why both the Constitutive Act and Agenda 2063 of the African Union prominently lay down the plan for youth's fair treatment and equal participation to meet your legitimate aspirations. We, your elders and leaders, have made a promise, and it's clearly documented. It is therefore your job to hold us responsible by doing your part. I challenge you, therefore, that by the end of this conversation, you discuss these issues and give tangible solutions that will continue to put us in the right direction, that enable us to reach legitimate aspirations for the Africa we want. Allow me to assure you that when you voice your concerns or when you step up and ask for space to get involved, you have the tools. And I will list a few listed in the Africa Youth Charter. At this point, I will quickly share with you our responsibilities, and later I will reiterate yours. Each AU member state's obligation is to ensure non-discrimination, freedom of movement, freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of thought, conscience, and the religion, protection of the family, access to property, youth participation, education and skills development, poverty eradication, socio-economic integration of youth, sustainable livelihoods, and the youth employment. Health, peace and security, sustainable development and protection of the environment, engagement of youth in the diaspora, protection of girls and young women, and elimination of harmful social and cultural practices, and the protection for mentally, physically challenged youth. Ladies and gentlemen, as I promised, here are your responsibilities as outlined in the Africa Youth Charter. The youth of Africa must be the custodians of your own development. This is loud and clear, isn't it? You are the custodians. Thank you. Protect and work for family life and cohesion. That is what makes us human. That to me is humility, and that is what we call Ubuntu. You are, I am, and you are, whatever the way people put it together. But to me, it's humility. It's saying, I've got to respect you, respect me, and I expect the good, and you also expect the good from me, and we make a difference and a better world to live in. Have full respect for parents and elders, and assist them anytime in case need in the context of positive African values. I will pause just a little bit to just say what I go through with my children, you know, when I would be one of the parents who may complain. You know, we're not yet savvy. And every now and again, I'm saying, please, can you come and show? But mommy, I showed you yesterday. I said, oh yes, fine, but please come and show me how to do it. So be patient with us. Times are changing every day. We find ourselves, you are moving with speed. We didn't even have the cell phones ourselves. So we would write letters, and it takes about 3 days, 4 days. To us, it was development, because at some point in time, letters would be put in bottles, and they go and throw in the river, and the river takes the letter wherever it is. So guys, let's clap for ourselves. Well, somewhere. So it is the full respect of elders, and assist them anytime case need in the context of positive African values. These are the African values. We respect our elders, and that should always be there. Even if we have come into modernity, yes, let's fuse this together and say we uphold our African values. Shall partake fully in civic duties as voting, decision making, and the governance. Must engage in peer-to-peer education to promote development. Youth must contribute to the promotion of economic development. Youth must exude an honest work ethic. Reject and expose corruption. There are complaints at each and every turn. It's because of corruption, that's why things are not moving. And you're educated today, you have this education that your parents have ensured you're educated, so that you look into some of these issues that will help shape your future. And that will, if you expose, it means you are saying we don't go that route. And we're looking forward to you guys to do things differently in shaping that future, in shaping that Africa that we want to live in. You are the leaders of tomorrow. We uphold the mantle today, and you will take over the mantle and run with it, and allow Africa to lead and go show that glory. We must work towards a society free from substance abuse, which is another challenge that is bedeviling us today. Those who have attended this and those who are online, advise your friends, advise your siblings, that's a wrong route to take. Protect, prevent, and respect African traditions and cultural heritage, and must protect the environment and conserve nature. I think I could go to town to talk about that. How do we preserve nature? If we preserve what we have, and why do we have some of the challenges that we are seeing today? Maybe it's because our land is just now barren, and nothing really showcases that we breathe because these trees breathe. So we don't have to block that. We don't have to cut some of these trees to ensure we live a good life. I think wildlife is here. They will expose in that regard. It begins with you at the level that you are, to say these are do's, these are don'ts, so that we create a good environment. Let me reaffirm the commitment of our continental leadership states and the government and the African Union Youth by stating Aspiration 6 of Agenda 2063 of our 50-year development blueprint, Agenda 2063. In Africa, whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people, especially to women and youth, and the caring for children. You are the people. You are the people who are going to occupy this space. It's true, people come and go. And you are the ones who are coming into, that's why I talked of the mantle and saying the leadership today is holding the mantle. And it has to hand over the mantle to the younger people. This blueprint emphasizes your active involvement in decision-making in all aspects. This agenda also asserts that Africa shall be an inclusive continent where no child, woman, or man will be left behind or excluded based on gender, political affiliation, religion, ethnic affiliation, locality, age, or other factors. Another principal point in this aspiration is full gender equality in all spheres of life. We are thus gathered here to do what it takes to share ideas that will advance best practices and partnership for engaging and empowering youth policies aiming at creating opportunity for self-reliance. That is important. I wish to end on a key point: gratitude. I thank the U.S. government agencies, Africa Diplomatic Corps, AU organs and institutions, NGOs, and African diaspora communities that have sent their representatives to join this significant dialogue. On behalf of the chairperson of the African Union Commission, H.E. Musa Faki Mahamat, I appreciate this contribution immensely. I thank you and wish you a successful forum.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador, for those inspiring words. If there's anything I know is that the African youth is definitely ready to take on those challenges that you listed, and thank you for the challenge. So our next speaker is Heather Joy Thompson, right here to my right. Heather Joy Thompson is a diplomat, an international affairs expert, a model, and an attorney. She has over 13 years experience as a career Foreign Service officer at the U.S. Department of State. She has lived, worked, and traveled in more than 40 countries across 6 continents. Heather Joy has received numerous recommendations from the Department of State and has twice received its most prestigious individual meritorious awards. Did I pronounce that correctly? All right. She's currently a press officer in the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs, and she's recently served at the United Nations. But before that, Heather Joy has served as a diplomat in residence and senior fellow at UCLA, where she's provided guidance on careers, internship, educational fellowship to students and professionals who aspire to careers in diplomacy. Heather Joy was 2018 Department of State International Career Fellow at the Aspen Institute. Please welcome Heather Joy Thompson.
Good afternoon, everyone.
You can clap louder than that.
Hey, thank you. I'm going to keep my remarks brief because I'm recovering from a cold and I don't want you guys to have your ears destroyed by my raspy voice. But there are a few things that I would like to share with you before we get started. First, thank you, Ambassador Hilda and Cheeto, for inviting me to be here today. Cheeto and I flew over on the same flight from Addis a couple of days ago. And we're just both, I think, very, very excited about the possibilities that exist for us to partner together, USAU and the African Union, to produce programming and events that will be beneficial mutually to both of our organizations. On behalf of the U.S. mission to the African Union, I bring you greetings and I welcome you to Washington, D.C., which is my home. But for now, for the next few years, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia is my home. It's not lost in me the importance of this moment, and particularly with respect to youth engagement, because my interest in Africa began when I was a relatively young person. I graduated from Spelman in college in 1999, and the very next month, I moved to Burkina Faso, West Africa, where I was a Peace Corps volunteer for 2 years in a rural village about 2 hours away from Bobo Dioulasso. And it was there that I really got my foundation as an Africanist and as a person who had interest in Africa, both in my heart and in my mind. And that has continued. I've moved back to the continent 3 times since then, And I'm just very proud of the growth and progress that I have seen over the last 20 years, and now to have the opportunity to work officially in a capacity where I can help to facilitate engagement and exchange between the United States and the entire continent. This conference will demonstrate to the world that young Africans are thought leaders and peacemakers and creatives and cultural shapers and innovators and digital natives, and most importantly, disruptors. Disruptors of systems that have not worked or have not worked fully to the benefit of all, dismantlers of systems and programs that do not help for us to exceed our potential and to reach the next level. There are things that we have in place structurally and socially that are limiting, and we are looking to you youth to break those things down, to tear them apart. And you're going to make people mad in the process. But disruption is not disrespect, no matter what some folks might try to tell you. So I hope that you have the courage and the ambition to pursue your dreams fully, your dreams for your person, for your family, for your societies, for your countries. Those things are legitimate. They have value, they have meaning, and we need to hear from you and to help support you in what your goals and endeavors are. Very often I hear this sort of cliched saying African solutions to African problems. Now, I get it, right? But I think that we might want to reframe that. It's actually African-centered solutions for global problems. There's no set of issues that are unique to any part of this world. Everything that's going on here is going on everywhere else. We are all dealing with, emerging technologies. My mom is a person who's still sending messages in a bottle, right? So I'm often expected to be that bridge for my parents to be able to better use and harness the power of technology. So I understand your frustration because I deal with it with my own family all the time. And I also appreciate the role that I have, even though I'm not a tech expert, in doing the best that I can to help move them forward. And that is really a charge that we all have, doing our best in the positions that we're in to move things forward. No one is going to have every single solution, not one of us. But each of us has the power and the capacity to work in our own gifts to move the agenda forward, to move humanity forward. And I hope that each of you can tap into that. Don't ever let anyone assert to you that their ideas are superior or more meritorious than what you're bringing to the table, because they're not. And I think the more we let that seep into our bones, that we all matter, that we all have something to say, and that each of us have something to contribute, the better off we will be. Some of the issues that we're working on at the United States Mission to the African Union in Addis are the environment, climate change, adaptation, and mitigation, all those things that affect our ability to live on this earth as human beings. I think of all the many issues that we're confronting, that one poses the most serious existential threat, because if we don't have clean air and don't have clean water, we have nothing. Right? So all the other issues sort of flow from our ability to resolve that one first and foremost. But there are other things that matter too: peace and security, and eradicating racism, and really being innovative in how we view health and public health issues. Just last year, the Secretary of State gave an award to a Ghanaian company for health innovation. And that company, which is, excuse me, a small company, is having an outsized influence because they are using drones to transport vaccines and medicines to rural villages where the refrigeration doesn't exist. So, those many of the medications are very sensitive to temperature, and if they can't be climate controlled, then they're useless. And so very often in rural areas, you see this disconnect where people just don't have access to life-saving remedies and treatments because the technology doesn't exist where they live to help preserve those things. Well, these sharp, innovative young people were like, look, there's a solution to this. We are going to take these drones and outfit them with a little, cooler pack basically, and use them to deliver these essential medicines. That kind of innovation can take place anywhere. You don't have to have millions and millions of dollars or an angel investor or a degree from Harvard Business School in order to think through things and create solutions that will work, because you know your own environment better than anyone else ever will. and you have the specific knowledge and understanding of your home and of your community and of your city and of your country to be able to create solutions that are on point and will be effective. That doesn't come from on high, that comes from in here. And that is another thing that we're looking for our youth innovators to really come to the table with. The last thing that I want to say is that, on behalf of my organization, but also on behalf of myself personally, I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to partner. I'm relatively new to this position. I arrived in Addis just 3 months ago, and Chido was one of the first persons that I met with from the AU, and we're really trying to advance the relationship. The last few years have been harrowing for all of us. COVID, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it. We're 3 years since the beginning of this pandemic now, and the different ways in which it's affected our lives and our ability to connect are, I think, being revealed yet. We don't know fully what the effect of this pandemic has been. We can see some of the economic measures and some of the social measures, but I think only time will tell how fully it has just reshaped our global societies. And as we're kind of coming out of the phase where we couldn't meet in person safely, we are now looking to really gin up the amount of programming that we have and the interactions that we have. So looking forward to partnering with Chido and with AU on that. And I thank you for your time, and I'm looking forward to hearing the dialogue. Take care.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson, for those words. Chido Pemba is the current AU Youth Envoy to the African Union Commission. She was appointed as the second African Union Youth Envoy by the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki, in November of 2021. As the youngest senior official in the history of the African Union and the youngest diplomat in the chairperson's cabinet. Congratulations. Ms. Pemba is tasked with championing youth development issues, but also representing the voice of 870 million youth in 55 countries across the continent. Recognized as one of 100 most influential women by CNN New York, as top 100 under 40 most influential people of African descent. Ms. Pemba is a Pan-African youth advocate who is on a mission to using her strength, her voice, her influence to lead work that impacts the lives of young people across the African continent, across the world. Please give a round of applause to Ms. Pemba.
Thank you very much for that and for the introduction. And allow me to acknowledge our ambassador to the African Union ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Hilda Mafudze. Allow me to also speak on already observed protocol, but welcoming you all today, and such an honor to have a room that's filled with African leaders within their respective fields. This is my second time engaging in Washington, D.C. I came here earlier in June and had a wonderful session with African youth in the diaspora, because part of my role involves me having to represent each and every African young person, be it whether you're in Africa or you're outside of Africa. And during that time that I came, I was embarking on a 60 days listening tour. And the reason of this listening tour is I realized that in order for me to fully represent this constituency, it has to be grounded in a voice. And that voice has to be the young people themselves. So when I sit in the assemblies, I have to ensure that everyone is represented, including your recommendations, including your best practices. As Ambassador Hilda said, Aspiration 6 of Agenda 2063 speaks about an Africa whose development shall rely on the potential of its people, especially its youth. And already we know that young people make up the largest demographic in Africa. But it should go beyond just speaking about this demographic. But what can we do with the potential that we have in young people, including in international cooperation, which is why we're here today ahead of the US-Africa Summit. I believe that Africa's journey is one where her destiny for so long has been defined by others. Her identity, her purpose, and value, all determined by others in the past. But now is the time for Africa to reclaim her destiny and redefine her identity, purpose and value in our own words and on our own terms as young people, to better serve our future and the generation to come too. This is my mandate, but also our mandate. And this is our mission. And I believe that today marks a key point in the journey, which is why I'm very pleased to welcome you all today in this forum. We should go beyond less speeches, but really more concrete action for African youth. And as I look into this room, I am truly inspired, and I look forward to your contributions as you also share your ideas that will be crucial in our efforts to raise the voices of young people across the continent. And I sincerely thank you for lending your expertise and valued input for this endeavor. Now, I will not speak much into the African Union Youth Charter, but maybe just give a summary in addition to what Her Excellency has already told us today. The African Union Youth Charter is a charter that was adopted by our head of states as a governing policy document in terms of the rights of our African youth across the continent. And in Article 21 specifically, it talks about the youth in the diaspora. State parties shall recognize the right of young people to live anywhere in the world, but in this regard, when it comes to our young people within the diaspora, to promote the equivalence when it comes to education, promote recruitment of African youth with specialized skills in the spirit of solutions that resolve African problems according to the national policies and priorities, to facilitate youth organizations in order to liaise and collaborate with the African youth diaspora, and to also establish structures that encourage and assist the youth in the diaspora and fully ensure that they're integrated into the social and economic life within Africa too. Now, the challenges that are faced by our continent are many, and today, as we focus on several of those challenges that align with the discussions that are to be held at the main US-Africa Forum, some of them included being food security and climate change as the two major development challenges of our time. In Africa, the food system is off track and the climate is changing profoundly. And in 2020, more than 1 in 5 people in Africa face hunger, more than double the proportion of hungry people in any other region. And about 282 million of Africa's population are undernourished.
Finish your statement.
Thank you.
I will just greet them when you finish.
Thank you very much. Are undernourished. Youth unemployment is one of the major challenges faced by the African youth across the continent too. And as we all know, one of the key agenda items of next week's US-Africa Leaders Summit is the African and African Diaspora Young Leaders Forum. And this forum, I believe, will provide us with all the historic opportunities to represent the voices of our fellow young Africans. And the theme of the forum will be amplifying voices, building partnerships that last. Now, within this forum, we have selected a few key areas which we will focus on, including on climate change, outcomes of COP27, diaspora engagements, promoting youth entrepreneurship, food security, conservation of environment. And in closing, I want to thank you all for taking the time to join these discussions. The ideas you share today will contribute to the outcomes and what we will present as the recommendations coming from our African youth for this time, where we're advocating to co-design, co-lead the Africa that we want. I wish you all the best in your discussions, and as I do so, allow me to acknowledge Commissioner Muchanga, our Commissioner for Economic Trade and Development from the African Union, who is also part of the African Union and is with us today, as well as part of the delegation of the African Union chairperson ahead of the Africa-US Summit. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Youth Envoy, Your Excellency, the African Union Ambassador, Permanent Representative to Washington, D.C. I came here just to greet you. When I was coming from another engagement, our Youth Envoy told me that she was going to have dialogue with you and said, I wish you were around. I said, well, I'm just coming from another meeting, but I'll be coming over to greet the team down because I consider myself a friend of the youth. Should be able to tell you a number of programs that we're undertaking, and very soon the African Development Bank is going to roll out a financing facility for the youth amounting to about $500 million, which shows the importance that we attach to the role of the youth, the leaders of today and the leaders of tomorrow. So I wish you all the best in your deliberations. I'm with you in spirit. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Ms. Pemba and Honorable Excellency and Ms. Joy Thompson. We're going to get right into our first panel. I'm going to call the first moderator, Ms. Bola, to come up and introduce our panel and her panelists. Bola, please.
Economic empowerment and capacity building through the creative industries, promoting youth entrepreneurship, diaspora engagement, human capital, knowledge transfer, and higher education. First, I'm going to call Neka Achabu. She is a, Neka, please make your way forward. She is a political and public affairs strategist. She centered her work on U.S.-Africa trade relations, immigration, and civic and political engagement. Neka was born in Nigeria, raised in Italy, and schooled in the U.S. She's fluent in Italian, Spanish, proficient in Arabic, Hindi, and several other languages. Neka is the founder of the U.S. Bilateral African Chamber of Commerce, an organization focused on increasing bilateral trade and investment between the U.S. and Africa. Please welcome her. Next is Mr. Ru Mashapure. He's the founder and CEO of RPS Group, a leader in storytelling and innovation ideation for private sector organizations. RPS has operations in 6 countries: US, UK, UAE, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and South Africa. Welcome him. Next is Ms. Folika Fakoya. She's a partnership specialist at the Global Partnership for Education, the World Bank's education-focused fund. At GPE, she does advocacy work for 12 years of quality education for every child. Before joining GPE, she conducted research and coordinated programs at the International Center for Research on Women. Please welcome her. And finally, Joshua Alade. He is an education and decent work policy advocate, passionate about positive youth development and sustainable community development. He is the executive director of Network of Youth for Sustainable Initiative, a youth-led civil society organization advocating for meaningful youth engagement in policies and programs that will enable them to lead and thrive. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. So I want to ask you to, we're at the African Union, we're all discussing African youth, and I'm speaking in an American accent. And I want you to pay attention to and ignore that, because I And the people on this, many of the people on the panel are members of the first and second generation of Africans who were born and raised in the diaspora, and are therefore deeply connected to and passionate about the continent. These young people have ascended to positions of power and influence, you know, in organizations around the world, and they're excited to share with you information on the topics at hand. And I want to start with the creative industries because many of you are probably aware that Burna Boy is performing tomorrow in DC. How many people are aware that Burna Boy is performing in DC tomorrow? And some of us are attending. Please, if you have extra tickets, share with us. So you don't have to be paying attention to know that African creativity is definitely having a moment in the sun. From Burna Boy selling out Madison Square Garden, you know, if you're taking Ubers here in DC in the evening, you're hearing Afro beats on the radio. And it's not just limited to music, it's across the creative industries. African creativity is having a moment. And we're seeing pockets of success and growth within the creative industries. And the creative industries are being driven by young people. It's the creativity of these young people who need capacity building and support. So I want to ask Mr. Rue, I want to start with you.
Yes.
I want to ask, you know, there's a strong potential for growth within the creative sector because of a lack of investment. Only 1% of continental GDP is dedicated to the creative sector, in spite of the fact that we are all aware of what's happening and the potential that exists. What policy or regulatory changes do you think are required to ensure that we're able to build the kind of capacity so that long-term value is achieved in the creative industries?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and I want to acknowledge everyone in the audience. Thank you for being here this afternoon. My name is Rungano Mashapure. I was actually born in Zimbabwe, but I came to the United States when I was 16 years old, so I've spent my entire adult life here in the U.S., but my connection with the motherland and Zimbabwe in particular has never died. In fact, it's actually even stronger now than ever. So I'm very excited to be here. To answer your question, I think one of the things that we need to do first is to stop looking at the creative sector as being creative. The creative sector should be looked at as being the foundation of our culture, the foundation of who we are as a people. I think that's the first step when we talk about what policies and what regulations need to take place in order for us to grow this sector. We need to change our mindset first. To answer your question more directly, I think one of the things that needs to happen is we need to recognize the importance of protecting intellectual property. Creative solutions, as I like to call them, because that's what they are, right? They are actually solutions to a problem, to a challenge. One of our challenges as Africa, as a continent, is that we are not seen as a viable brand. We are seen as a commodity, whereas we are actually an innovator. So the first thing we need to do is innovate the way we look at intellectual property, right? Burna Boy, his music, that's intellectual property. Whatever we create, content is king. We've all heard that terminology. And he who strokes the pen and holds the pen is the person in power. So we need to look at organizations such as ARIPO that are mandated by governments to protect intellectual property and give them the facilities they need in order to fully execute their agenda. I actually happen to work with ARIPO. I've been working with ARIPO for the last 5 years as an outside consultant through our company. And one of the challenges that they're constantly bringing to light is the fact that they are seen by even the very governments that mandate them, they're seen as a luxury, as an afterthought. We should be starting by protecting our intellectual property, because our intellectual property is our future, and our creative elements are solutions to our future. So regulations need to be centered around intellectual property protection. The second thing we need to do is we need to stop being afraid of ourselves. And what I mean by that is when a young person speaks, they're speaking from a fresh perspective. They're speaking from a clean lens. It's unbiased. We need to welcome those voices And instead of shutting them down or shutting them up, we should amplify them, right? So we need to look at human rights, freedom of speech. We need to champion freedom of speech because that's the only way we're going to encourage the creative sector to grow. So we need to have regulations that protect us when we speak up, when we create solutions, creative solutions that may be deemed as being culturally sensitive, or solutions that may be deemed as, unworthy, or ones that go against the grain. Going against the grain is the only way we can move the meter, is the only way we can grow the industry. We've all seen the impact that Nollywood has had in such a short period of time. Now, whether or not you agree with the content they're creating, it has had an impact, right? You're now starting to see mainstream America embrace African colors, African ideologies. That's the kind of impact that we can have across the continent if we protect our rights as human beings, our rights to free speech, and not just say it, but actually enact laws that will protect those young people when they're creating the creative solutions.
Thank you. I think you're absolutely right. According to UNESCO, the creative sector can create 20 million jobs and $20 billion in revenue per year across the continent. Maybe excluding Nigeria, because we all know Nigeria is doing. Are there any nations, any particular nations on the continent that are doing a good job introducing the kind of regulation or regulatory protections that you're talking about, and maybe encouraging creative production in their countries?
I think, I cannot speak from an expert standpoint, but I can tell you, let me backtrack a little bit. So one of the things that my group has been doing is we asked ourselves, so what role are we playing within this creative element? So I think going back to 2020, most of us had a aha moment because the pandemic forced us to look in the mirror and self-reflect. So one of the things that I asked myself was, what contribution am I making? What legacy am I building as an African living in diaspora? So we launched their online radio station back in 2020, Radio Msika. And Radio Msika is geared towards amplifying the voices of Africans living in diaspora. Right, so one of the things that we face with challenges with regulations, but fortunately, being a US-based radio station, we were able to overcome all those obstacles. We also launched an online streaming service whereby we are curating African content by Africans. So the idea being, we want to take content coming out of Africa that normally is not shown on mainstream media. For example, how many of us have heard of Shaka Zulu? Right, we've all heard of Shaka Zulu. How many of us have seen a Shaka Zulu movie or anything to do with Shaka Zulu created by actual Africans? Very few, right? So our history has been written by others. So to answer your question, what I'm seeing on the continent, I'm starting to see things sprout. So for example, in countries like South Africa, I'll say South Africa is probably in the Southern African region, is probably leading the cause, because what they're starting to do is through local chambers of commerce, they're actually encouraging young creators to curate content that can then be broadcast on local television channels. So if we can take that blueprint and then multiply 55 times across the continent, we can start to see those results come to play. So I'll say South Africa is definitely one country that I've seen that's trying to actually move the meter.
Thank you. You mentioned the diaspora, and I'd like for us to move to diaspora engagement. Today, more than 62 million Americans, 1/5 of the country, are first or second generation diasporans, making the U.S. home to more global diaspora members than any other country. And as these populations grow, so does their potential for impact as they transfer resources, knowledge, and ideas back to their home countries, and vice versa. I want to ask you, Nneka, how can the African diaspora mobilize for a place at the table both at home and abroad?
Thank you for that question. My name is Nika Chapu. I'm a Nigerian American. I have been here in the United States for quite some time, and a lot of the work that I do involves engaging diaspora members on the importance of politics. And so, again, thank you for your question. We are a very, very large diaspora here in the United States, and a lot of our contribution comes from remittances, a lot of the stuff that, apologies. Thank you. And so we send a lot of remittances back home. We send a lot of education projects, but a lot of things that we don't do here is being participant of the electoral process. And so for the last few years, I've been involved in some of the electoral races where there is significant gaps, where the African diaspora can actually bridge that gap. And so we see that our influence actually, it comes from the power of the vote. And the African diaspora, unfortunately, has not connected, unlike the API diaspora or the Hispanic diaspora, on how important this is in terms of policy changes. It will be very hard for us to continue seeing all of these summits and events happening surrounding Africa if we as a people are not asking to appropriate money through Congress to hold these events and have these discussions. And so I invite our diaspora and young people that are here to be a little bit more plugged in what is happening politically here in the United States. Because most of the times, most of the policies that are being written are not being written by us. Second generations, folks that have the experience of being back home or have parents that have had that immigrant experience coming here and realizing most of the times our parents are focused on making sure that we have food on the table, that folks are going to school, getting an education, and are not really paying attention to what is happening surrounding them, not thinking that a lot of these policies that are affecting us and could affect us back home could improve if only we were using our influential power to vote and to put in place those who actually think about Africa like we do in terms of developing our continent. And so a lot of our voices together could carry influence if we all had an agenda, especially for U.S.-Africa relations. And on a week ahead of the summit, I am very enthusiastic about the fact that they are engaging the African diaspora here in the U.S. I wish that that engagement was outside of Washington, because we have the African diaspora in many other states here in the United States that are not as engaged in Washington, because Washington is the bedrock of all of this diplomatic engagement. So thank you for that question, and I'm hoping that folks realize the importance of mobilizing and being active in the political process here in the United States, because it does make a difference in the policies that are being written about back home.
It's interesting that you mentioned policy and also the level of political engagement of other diaspora communities like Latinx people. I think many Africans in the diaspora wonder the impact that, do not pay attention to the impact that they can have if they come together and, advocate and lobby for causes, that they believe in. How can the African diaspora change the game in terms of policy, and how long would it take? Certainly, we're very far behind the Latin community, for example, in coming together, consolidating our power, political power, in the diaspora. How long would it take, and how can we change the game?
Well, administrations come and go. And so this is a long-term project, but I think within 2 administrations, we could possibly at least start seeing differences in terms of how the African diaspora can affect change. I would speak with examples, for example, in Minnesota. In Minnesota, we can see that we have all the way from the state level to the city council level a very strong Sudanese and Somali diaspora. In Maryland area, you're going to see a very strong Ethiopian diaspora, and they are affecting policy, especially during election. I mean, this particular last state election in Virginia was really focused strategically by the Habesha community and making sure that their voices were heard about what was happening in their region. And so they voted with what they were thinking about. In the state of Texas, there's a large Nigerian American population that could see some of their people actually entering politics, and that could change a lot of things for the folks living in that area. So I believe that we're already there in terms of the African diaspora being engaged and moving, but I still think that we need more. And so we need another Ilhan. We need, at the congressional level, we need other folks at, working in the administrations that represent the African interests. And we're there, but I think with more time and more organizing, we'll be able to get more folks in the fold. So maybe 2 administrations from now, we'll have more power.
That sounds optimistic. I hope that that's the case. We start working now. I want to take us back to the continent, and I want to talk about human capital, knowledge transfer, and higher education. Youth unemployment remains a persistent development challenge with African nations and international development partners focusing on investing in and positioning job creation fueled by entrepreneurship as a priority development solution. So Joshua, I'd like to ask you, what is the data driving this belief that investment in youth entrepreneurship is the key to unlocking youth's potential across the continent?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, great. So I work in an intersection of youth's positive development, and I've lived all my life on the continent. I only went to the UK last year for my master's, and the good part is my graduation is today, but missing out on it.
Congratulations!
Thank you. And one of the things that really made me pursue my master's was because I saw this very important of young people being able to work with government to speak around the issues of youth entrepreneurship. About 900 million young people on the continent, and that's a huge potential that if we can harness that through entrepreneurship, we can be able to produce so many things for the world. And we could look at China, for instance, we look at India, we look at the United States. These are countries that are making things, they are producing. And most of us on the continent, we are usually the ones that are consuming every one of these things. We want the latest gadgets without asking ourselves, how does these things come out? And we also have to look at industries. These are the ways whereby we can be able to create jobs, and prioritizing entrepreneurship for young people is really, really essential. And I'll give very important data from Nigeria. Basically, you have a country of about 200 million plus, and about 150 million young Nigerians are poor, and we are not really producing so much. if we can be able to harness our industries, if we can be able to look at the opportunities that technology offers the continent, we have a way to be able to create opportunities for the world. And I'll give an example, a very good example of a unicorn from Nigeria, Flutterwave. This is a finance institution that was built solely by young people. And they're not just creating jobs, they're also creating innovative solutions for old generation banks and the new ones, supporting the government. So youth entrepreneurship is the best way for us to be able to harness the demographic dividend. It's the only way that we can create jobs, and that's why every time when there's a conversation around young people and jobs, I'll say no, let's not just talk about young people and jobs. Show the data. How much jobs are we creating? 2 years ago, I worked on a policy document around creating jobs for young Nigerians, and the government said, oh, we love this document, we're going to create 3.7 million jobs between 2021 and 2024. And the next question is, what's happening right now? How many jobs have we created? We have young people who are involved in internet scam and the likes. It's not because they want to do these things. It's because there's no enabling environment for them. And this is why we need to create jobs for young people, for us to be able to harness the demographic dividend, for us to be able to attract more people to the continent. Chinese and the likes are coming to the continent because there's something they are saying that we Africans are not seeing. There's something that their government is doing for them to be able to come to Africa. And that's why our government, every one of us in the diaspora, we need to start asking ourselves, what are the solutions here that we can take back home? No matter how small it is, if you can be able to support 2 young persons to be able to get into decent work, it is going to create a multiplier effect. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned the enabling environment. You mentioned the enabling environment, and we hear a lot about an enabling environment, and we know that the bulk of the responsibility for creating an enabling environment is with the government. So how do we involve young people in not the creation of the enabling environment, but in developing the capacity building programs that are required, that would exist in parallel, in tandem with the creating of that enabling environment, so that when the environment is enabled, the youth have the capacity to take full advantage?
Beautiful question. And the first thing we need to do as young people is we first need to have interest in government. We need to be interested in governance, because that's where the decision making is happening. I would always say something that you cannot build without the government. You are trying so hard, you are trying to make things happen, and just one policy decision will just destroy 2 years of hard work, 3 years of hard work. So the first thing is that we young people, we need to be interested in governance. And when we're interested in governance, the next thing is we need to start building, or we need to start mentoring or building the capacity of fellow young people to understand how governance works. A lot of young Africans do not know how it works. They feel like we are, government is on one side, young people is on one side. No, government and young people are supposed to be able to work together, and it's only when we develop the capacity of fellow young people that we'll be able to understand this. And then the other thing we need to also be able to do is find these strategic linkages between maybe foreign missions, embassies, countries that you know encourage youth engagement. By so doing, it's easier for you to walk through these corridors to be able to bring your own government to the table. And I'm going to give an instance about this. I realized that usually for my country, meaningful youth engagement is on the tokenistic level. And what I needed to do was I asked myself, who does the government listen to? And I noticed that when it comes to decent work, they always want to work with the International Labour Organization. So the next thing I did was I tried to find someone within the International Labour Organization saying, I have this idea around meaningful youth engagement. Can you work with me on it? I know that the government will listen to you because you will bring the funding. And in the first year when we worked together, when the government saw the funding, and they were like, if you're going to do this, we are going to bring our young people for you to work with. And the ILO said, no, we're going to work with the young people that Joshua recommends. And by so doing, that was how we were able to work around something called the Nigerian Youth Employment Action Plan. Basically, this plan had not been worked on for about 10 years. I think since 2010 was the last time that the plan was worked on. And because of this idea of bringing in stakeholders that the government would respect, the plan was revitalized in 2021. It was launched by the Nigerian government. So that's something we need to be able to do. And then finally, I would say that we also need to share our knowledge as young people. Very, very important. Oftentimes on the continent, you have young people with amazing ideas, but you don't want to share. You have networks, you don't want to share, you don't want other young people to know what you know. Because when every other person understands where you're coming from, they know where you're driving at. Even if they do not have the formal education, but they are able to understand the system, that if this works, it's going to transform our lives as young people. They're going to listen to you. So we as young people, we need to open up ourselves more, and we need to always believe that the next young person close to you is someone that is important. It's a voice. That person matters, and together we can transform the engagement between young people and government. Thank you.
Joshua, you mentioned, looks like there might be a question, but I want to ask Olika first. Joshua mentioned that there are 900 million young people across the continent of Africa, and the truth is that that can be a blessing or a curse, depending on the investments that we make now. So from your perspective, why is it important for our leaders to prioritize investments in human capital in order to unlock Africa's youth dividend?
Thanks so much, Bolanle. I'd like to take a moment to just think about the theme of this panel, which is unlocking Africa's youth dividend, and really just acknowledge that the fact that there are 900 million young people on the continent does not automatically mean that there will be economic growth. It does not automatically mean that there will be jobs. There has to be investment in human capital. And one of the primary forms of investment in human capital and building human capital is investing in education. I'm just going to make it really personal. How many of us here went to school, went to primary 1, primary 2, went to secondary school? Me? I hope, we would not be where we are today if we weren't educated, if we didn't have access to education. I'm a daughter of 2 teachers. They're not teaching now, maybe I stress them out a lot, but that really instilled in me a real appreciation for the value of education. And that's something that not all African children have access to today. Even prior to COVID, we had 100 million children out of school. That's not informal or informal education, not accessing education materials at all. And that means that they were not being given the opportunity to fulfill their potential. They're not learning, they're not building the skills they need to be entrepreneurs, to be engaged in political processes, or to be productive in the creative industry. And obviously we know that that has been exacerbated by COVID, by climate change. Earlier speakers talked about the impact of climate change. We know that floods in Nigeria shut down thousands of schools, left thousands of children without access to education materials. In the Horn of Africa, there's an ongoing drought that not only has caused children to drop out of school, but has had a specific gendered effect on girls. I was talking to one of our youth leaders in Kenya who was saying in her village, girls are walking further to get water for their families, and so they're not going to school. For every girl that drops out of school, that's one less girl becoming a young woman, fulfilling her potential, engaging in her community, becoming a leader, and giving back. And so we really need to think about how we invest in education. And also, when we think about investment in human capital, it goes beyond just building schools. We have to think about putting children and young people at the center of the system and really look at the entire ecosystem that affects them. So apart from schools and access to education, that means that they need access to safe water and sanitation facilities. School meals, I don't know if you've ever tried to listen to anybody on an empty stomach, but it does not work for me. I doubt it works for anyone else. And so we need children who have food, who are nourished, who are receiving nutrition so that they can learn. We need to create schools and systems that are safe from violence. When children are scared, when I'm scared, when you're scared, we can't focus, we can't learn, we can't absorb information. And so all this means that we need to be prioritizing children and young people so that they can then go on and build into the economy and be productive and really build the future that we want to see. This requires collaboration across sectors, but I think we've had some conversation earlier about sort of African priorities and what it means for us to align our efforts, align strategic engagements and partnerships and funding behind the priorities of the continent. And that's something that my organization, GPE, the Global Partnership for Education, does. We leverage funding behind the priorities that our partner countries in Africa have stated. So 40, the majority of our partner countries are in Africa. We work primarily with lower income and lower middle income countries. And these countries work with us to create a partnership compact. They tell us what their priorities in the education sector are. And then what we do is we work to leverage funding behind that. How can we help them address those bottlenecks? That's at the global level. But at the country level, at the community level, young people are already taking action. We have a partnership with various young people in Africa. Clement in Zambia is working with his schools, creating tree planting groups and clubs, going out and sensitizing children and young people on the importance of taking care of our planet, and also working at the community level with market leaders on how to dispose of refuse in a way that doesn't negatively impact the environment. We have a youth leader, Asamawi in Ghana, who is working with young girls, training young girls in northern Ghana about their sexual health and reproductive rights, helping them figure out how to protect themselves from pregnancy and from other situations that can keep them out of school and keep them from receiving an education. So what that means is that across the board, there are multiple opportunities for us to be building human capital from the government level, at the global level, national, and at the community and local level. And really what I'm excited about to be here today and to be talking with you is to say that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. You mentioned Arepa, the project you work with. You've mentioned initiatives. There's so much that we can plug into where we can focus our energy and where we can really come together and leverage our collective voice and our collective efforts and really think about what we can be doing to move the needle and to push progress forward at every level, whether that's in a specific community, whether that's on the political stage here in the US or globally, or whether that's even just, in your own family, in your own home, what are the decisions that you're making. But yeah, so back to the question. So investing in human capital in education at the very basic level is really the key to unlocking this youth dividend, because otherwise young people are not going to be entrepreneurs, they're not going to be job creators, they're not going to be leaders in their communities and beyond, and they're not going to be the fantastic creators that we really enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for, but there's nothing like the passion of young people to make us confident about the future of our continent. I thank you all for your contributions, and thank you all for your attention.
Please give the panel another round of applause, and Ms. Bola here for moderating. Yeah. So we have a quick adjustment to the program. We were supposed to do 2 additional panel discussions. And so we're going to pause for 30 minutes for lunch. We're starting back here exactly at 2:30. So that means please be here at 2:30, not throw away your trash by 2:30 and 2:50. So please.
One question, please.
Yes,
Before we leave, I'd like to know if we will have opportunity to interact with the panelists.
Yes. So what we will do is let's talk about it when we come. But I know there's 2 more panel and there's a breakout and then there's a presentation.
Okay.
I think people can also ask questions during the time. So see you here at 2:30. Thank you so much. Please go to the cafeteria. That's where lunch is. Thank you.
What is Africa? Is it the wildlife, the beautiful coasts, thriving cities? It is more than that. It is the people. Our 55 countries have many things in common. Our cultures bind us together. They give us strength and identity. They make us proud. By sharing our knowledge and working together, we're building a new Africa that's driven by investments, by game-changing infrastructure projects, and using transformative technology to change the way we live, work, and conduct business. Using our largest natural resource, our vast arable land, we are making advances in agriculture, developing new industries, creating jobs, and improving livelihoods. Together, we are moving forward on economic integration. By consolidating Africa's significant internal market to foster trade within the continent and with the world, Africa is open for business. We are building the Africa we want. So, what is the continent of the future? The answer is Africa. is Africa? Is it the wildlife, the beautiful coasts, thriving cities? It is more than that. It is the people. Our 55 countries have many things in common. Our cultures bind us together. They give us strength and identity. They make us proud. By sharing our knowledge and working together, we're building a new Africa that's driven by investments, by game-changing infrastructure projects, and using transformative technology to change the way we live, work, and conduct business. Using our largest natural resource, our vast arable land, we are making advances in agriculture, developing new industries, creating jobs, and improving livelihoods. Together, we are moving forward on economic integration. By consolidating Africa's significant internal market to foster trade within the continent and with the world, Africa is open for business. We are building the Africa we want. So, what is the continent of the future? The answer is Africa. What is Africa? Is it the wildlife, the beautiful coasts, thriving cities? It is more than that. It is the people. Our 55 countries have many things in common. Our cultures bind us together. They give us strength and identity. They make us proud. By sharing our knowledge and working together, we're building a new Africa that's driven by investments, by game-changing infrastructure projects, and using transformative technology to change the way we live, work, and conduct business. Using our largest natural resource, our vast arable land, we are making advances in agriculture, developing new industries, creating jobs, and improving livelihoods. Together, we are moving forward on economic integration. By consolidating Africa's significant internal market to foster trade within and with the world, Africa is open for business. Building the Africa we want. So, what is the continent of the future? The answer is Africa.
about, and we need to focus on the reflections of the state of Africa's preparedness in climate change, environmental conservation, and environmental equity. We are also focusing on ensuring food security. According to the 2022 Global Report on Food Crisis, at least 1 in 5 Africans go hungry to bed, and 140 million people in Africa face acute food insecurity. Climate change continues to intensively and globally shocks the businesses as usual, and sub-Saharan Africa is also allergic of what termed the perfect storm. So with the inflation levels urgently need to be tamed and the burden of the debt made more sustainable, perhaps no priority is more pressing than addressing the food insecurity and the climate change. In response to these challenges, today we open the dialogue with Africa's young, innovative leader, and to find out how they envision increasing cooperation on the shared global priorities between Africa and the US, and how they can work together toward that. We would like to welcome our panelists, and would like to first start by Mr. Ismail Mohammed. Mr. Ismail is the Deputy Head of Mission of the Djibouti Embassy in Washington, D.C. He is a diplomat, and he works on the security, political, and the global affairs across Africa. We all know that the COP27 concluded in November in Egypt with a decision to establish and operationalize a fund to compensate vulnerable nations for loss and damage from climate change. In your perspective, Mr. Ismail, what's Africa's current position post the climate change decisions of COP27? Thank you.
Thank you, Rakda, and thank you also the African Union for inviting me. I'm really glad that you consider me as a young, and I'm really glad to be here with you and talking about this very important issue of climate change, especially for Africa. I'm from Djibouti. You know, Djibouti in the Horn of Africa is one of the regions in Africa is very affected by this by the climate change, and we have so many challenges. And I think it was a few weeks ago, we had this what we call the African COP in Egypt, and it was very important for African countries to use this platform that to make sure that the world heard their voice and their problems, and the climate change is a very important issue for Africa. And we really appreciate and salute that this African COP will be remembered in history, where the lost and damaged fund was agreed, even if there is no commitment for the countries, for the amount, but the idea to have that they have accepted, and that to put in place this fund, the loss and damage fund, is very important.
Thank you so much. Speaking about the fund, we believe that in the past we have witnessed a lot of similar ideas. So we would like to know how this fund, after the decision, is different. We would like to know this from Mr. Ayoub Husham. Allow me to introduce Mr. Ayoub. He is a career Moroccan diplomat who is currently a political counselor at the Embassy of Morocco in Washington, D.C. Prior to that, he was a deputy mission of the Moroccan mission in Abuja, and he was covering the bilateral relations between Morocco and Nigeria. So he worked at the African Affairs Department and the Moroccan Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he's in charge of the partnership with Africa. Would you please let us know more how this fund is different?
Yes, thank you, everyone. Exactly. This is not the first time that promises have been made to Africa and other regions who are really facing the bad consequences of climate change. We all remember that 12 years ago, we have been promised $100 billion to be released by 2020 to help poor countries face the consequences of climate change, and so far nothing has been done. So this COP was very special because as Africans we wanted to go beyond pledges, promises, and statements, and that was possible to achieve so by speaking as one alongside other regions who are facing the same issues as we do. And also this COP was very different for African nations because we were able to witness what Africa can do for itself. And I would like to mention the launch of the African Climate Risk Facility that will be for an amount of $40 billion locally funded through the financial markets to help African countries mitigate the bad effects of climate change, but also to pay for loss and damages. It is very important to have the countries who are causing the climate change to accountable and pay for their actions, but also it's not about a battle. This is a challenge that we all face as a humanity, and we have to partner in it. And this is why this US-Africa Leaders Summit, why we are all here together for, is to work hand in hand with our US partners to find the solutions to not only loss and damages, but to help us become more resilient through transfer of technology. Yes, thank you for your money, but we don't want that. We want more than that. We want transfer of technology, invest in our youth, in our own African solutions. We have resourceful youth. I lived in Nigeria for 5 years, and I got the chance to witness how creative the Nigerian private sector is, especially among the youth who are investing heavily in technologies to address these issues of climate change and resilience. So technology is very important, and we hope that this US-Africa Leaders Summit will help put more light on technology.
Thank you so much. Technology and that needed, and also the connection of working together is needed. So we'd like to speak more, as there is a huge connection between the food system and the climate change and energy. We would like to speak more a little bit about the food security. So allow me to move to the next speaker, Ms. Tenda Jivibu. She is the first Zimbabwean to attend the United World College in Mostar. She recently graduated. Congratulations as a Davis Scholar in the University of Oklahoma. She accelerated a master's in economics and bachelor and international development. Mr. Tenda is involved in various activities related to advocacy, including African Union Women's League, representing international students in different ways in the university in the US. She is currently working in the Housing Assistance Council as a special assistant to the president and CEO. In this intersection, Tatenda, we would like to know, as an African youth diaspora working with adaptation with the climate change, what do you think we should do, or actually should be done, to prioritize the food security in the climate change agenda?
Thank you so much, Ms. Ragda, for that question, and thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to us. My approach to this question is going to be very unconventional, and I want to say a little bit controversial, because I want to believe that a lot of the approach that we have been getting is very westernized, and it's not very Afrocentric. The fact that we use Africa as one continent, we see it as one big bowl of problems, yet we face different predicaments and different problems that each country has. For example, the food security that right now Djibouti might be facing is not the same issue of food security that Zimbabwe might be facing. One, because of geographical location. Two, because of the politics in these different countries. So the moment we begin to generalize these terms of food security, the moment we begin to generalize that the African continent and the solutions that we're wanting to drive across, we have solution that are not unique to our problems. And we need to start creating models that are unique to different countries. We need to start creating models that are unique to the people of different countries within the African context. With that being said, the food security issue in regards to climate change is honestly one that is very complex, because there's a huge intersectionality between poverty, there's politics, there's also the economic aspect of it. And we need to diversify the way we approach the situation by looking at the different variables that influence and affect food security in Africa. For example, right now in Zimbabwe, I know there's been a lot of political unrest, especially as we're facing our upcoming elections, right? These are things that are causing food insecurity for people. Rural versus urban. The people in urban populations are able to easily access the food that is imported from other countries, but the people in rural places might not be able to access the same food. The political unrest in the country, of course, favors the urban population more than it favors the rural population. And so the things that we're creating when we're having these conversations, they should be tailored towards the different solutions that different regions in that particular country are facing. And we need to start involving the communities within those local contexts into the conversations that we're having. Here, I kind of see this as somewhat a bit eliticist, in the sense that here we're all well-educated people. We've been given the privilege to come together and speak together about these conversations. But where are the rural people that cannot afford a plane ticket, yet alone dreamed of getting to the airport, but are affected by the fact that they might not have a meal in the middle of the day, or let alone a meal at all? So it's so important that we begin to take these conversations into the local context, into the communities that we're trying to serve, hear what they have to say, and see how better we can serve our communities before we can start thinking of climate change, because that is not, to be very honest, that is not our priority as the African continent. So much we've been forced to adapt to certain things that have been imposed by the West. Right now we're still trying to dismantle colonial rule. Right now we're still trying to catch up with even incorporating democracy into our systems. We're still trying to modernize our economies. These are all complex issues that we've been trying to achieve. Zimbabwe, for example, got its independence in 1980. In 1980 to 2022, already we're facing so many different things that are evolving on a daily basis. So until we can face the different unique predicaments that each and every African country is facing, is the beginning, I feel, of change. And it's honestly the beginning of what I feel will be a long-term generational overcast of success and prosperity for everybody on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So you raised so many points, and I think that delivering for the food security and working in all that needs a key factor, which is technology. So with this regard, please allow me to introduce Mr. Arnold Ashiri. He is an engineer and entrepreneur. He pioneered the development and deployment of the first emergency information system in Africa. His innovation had the capacity to detect accidents in real time and notify the competent authorities. Through his innovation, thousands of real-time incidents in Cameroon, improving the safety of thousands of months. Congratulations for the job, Mr. Arnold, and we would like to hear from you as a tech specialist. What, or actually in this current situation, how are we using technology and how tech is linked to the climate change agenda?
Thank you for the question. Good morning, everyone. Oh, sorry, good afternoon. Yeah, so technology is the one thing that can be counted upon reliably to solve most of our problems, even though it causes some of these problems. The great African scene was to step back and allow the more developed nations to define priorities, and they just had to follow the priorities. And what did we get? We get systems that could not respond to African problems appropriately. If Africans have to evolve, go above and beyond the past, we have to first of all come to terms with the great scene. The first one in this context is regulation. If technology can play a role in changing providing solutions to climate change, we should be able to have systems not just designed to put out bad actors, which is what I see most governments do. African governments, they tend to regulate to put out bad actors, but they don't understand the regulation themselves. To regulate something, you have to understand it. If you don't understand it, my recommendation is don't regulate it. You have to be able to understand it before you can regulate it. So we've seen, for instance, my example, when I developed my technology, it was shameful that I got to be approved by the the UK government and the Royal Academy of Engineering before the solution could be approved in Cameroon. So it had to go abroad before coming back home, because the regulation, the systems were not in place, the regulation were not in place, the specialists were not in place. Hire specialists if you're not capable of having the know-how to push out or encourage technologies that you don't understand. But if you don't understand it, don't regulate it. If you understand it, you can regulate it. The second one is the financing issue. Traditional financial institutions, and both public and private, they tend to finance projects and entrepreneurs in Africa and around the world. It's more severe in Africa because we don't have as many as in other parts of the world. The problem with these institutions is that they are very risk averse. They kind of budget their risk, and they can only like, what am I getting in if I'm putting this? Whereas when it comes to disruptions and technologies, you're dealing with people who are trying to implement concepts, procedures, and processes that have not been tried before. So on a probability scale, it's like 90% that these projects will fail. So if you're funding these projects, just put it in your head. It's more likely to fail and to succeed. Just say, yeah, be giving you the opportunity to fail. And I can guarantee you many innovators and entrepreneurs will be able to come up with great solutions if they are given the possibility to fail and not restrict them on the risk budgeting scale or ladder or something.
Thank you so much for this intervention. And as we started saying that the technology is the key, we also need to point out that the diaspora role and the youth participation is a key as well, because being in the UK and thinking or working back on something that can be reflected on Cameroon, on your country or your whole continent is also a key that we actually are gathered today to work on. So in this perspective, I'd like to ask Mr. Arnold, how do we ensure that the Africa diaspora and how we ensure the African diaspora are being engaged in that decision-making within the African continent, within the climate change agenda?
This is a fair platform for the African diaspora to participate. It's quite interesting to see the number of young and vibrant people that are here willing and able to engage. I see in the past session, many people said they wanted to like engage with the panelists and so they can have discussions. This is one way of collecting the input of the diaspora in order to see how they can affect or have an impact on policy. Another way will be to create platforms, technology or otherwise, communication mechanisms that can enable African youths to chip in their ideas. And let's be honest, ideas are not the end game. The end game is to execute these ideas. So create platforms that permit these people to chip in their ideas, but make sure that you create these processes and the mechanisms to make sure that competent people can execute on these ideas.
Thank you so much. So moving the ideas into action, we move to Mr. Tenda to speak more about the maybe possible solutions in the food security issue from the youth perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Technology. I think from the youth perspective, it is very important to actually include the youth on the table where these things are being discussed. We are the future, that is very evident, and we have amazing, brilliant minds that are innovating the technology that we need or the different policies that we need. So we need to start engaging our youth on policy level because we're recognizing that the problem is from the top, right? It's from the hierarchy, it's a pyramid. And the moment we the trickle-down effect, the moment we exclude the youth that are seeing these things, that have the brilliant ideas from these conversations, we're removing a crucial part that can be a very, 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 very important thing in solving our problems. The most other important thing that I wanted to highlight was creating programs that allow the funneling of resources from the diaspora to building local resilience back home. These programs could be supported by the government, it could be supported by the different entities or agents that are actually working in providing food security back home, and actually now involving the youth in the diaspora together with the youth that are back home to work together in building sustainable programs and policies that secure food for our people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate the work which is being done. And I'd like to ask Mr. Ayoub, being a diplomat and at the same time a young person, a young African who is activist in the climate change and the environmental agenda. So how do you think that how is being the link between the decision making and at the same time the African work, and how you deal closely with working with the African initiatives?
First of all, we all need to shout out to the African Union, our continental organization, for focusing on youth and for youth, because we have, and diaspora as well, because we have an envoy for youth affairs, as well as now diaspora is recognized as the 6th region of Africa. That was a milestone, a very important achievement that we have managed to achieve. So, and we are very grateful to the African Union for that. Yeah, how to be the link? I think these issues that we all face are borderless, so they require borderless solutions. The African Union is an amazing framework for policy development, and as African countries who do not necessarily sometimes have included in their own local agendas, or they don't have the mechanism to implement or to develop certain policies or mechanism. The African Union has this opportunity, has this platform. We as African countries, and Ismail can confirm that, we always make sure to include the African Union component and the continental component in our bilateral engagement, especially here in the US, for instance. We were very, so next week we'll have the US-Africa Leaders Summit, but we are going there as a group, as a bloc, to defend our interests, because we know that if we speak, each country speak on its own, we are not going to be loud, but as a bloc, we have more power. And the diaspora is very important. The previous panels, one of the panelists mentioned how powerful it is to engage the diaspora, how they can be effective in shaping the policy and the foreign policy of the US. And this is what we also are trying to do by engaging on our diasporas, but also speak on behalf of our continental organization. I will lead to Ismail so he can further comment on that.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I'm really glad you talk about this issue. It's very important. When we are talking to the US and when we are engaging with the big partner, you know, like China or the US, and we always you know, have a base is the African Union, and what is the policy and what the head of state have agreed and to implement in our continent. And we are more powerful when we are united. That is very important. And I think also that we are more powerful when we listen to our youth. It's very important. And as a government official, I think that it's very interesting for us to come in this kind of gathering, you know, listening to the youth, what is their experience, what is their expectations, and is good for us, you know, when we are engaging with foreign partners, we can reflect on these questions you are raising. It's very important. That's why I thank the African Union for inviting us and to let us, you know, engage and meet with the youth here in this session, preparing the US-Africa Summit. This is very important. The first summit was in 2014, and it was initiated by President Obama, and now this is the second summit. And now what we want, it's like an institutionalized summit, regularly, like we have with China, like we have with India, Turkey, and other Europe. We have this kind of regularly meeting that we can discuss and engage. And we want the US also to have this kind of engagement with Africa, not discussing with only Djibouti or only Morocco. This is not the point. We are more powerful and more strong when we are united. And I thank my brother and sister for their very powerful and very passionate presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So having today the platform that gathers the youth, the young activists in the climate change, and also the leaders table. So I'd like to hear in a 30 seconds each a call to action, not only for the government but also to the youth. So how do you confirm that their voices are heard within the decision table making? Would like to take Mr. Arnold for a 30-second call to action to the African youth.
If I were to talk to African youths, I would say believe in yourself. If I were to talk to government, it would be understand it before regulating it. I'm sticking to that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tender.
I think for me, to the youth, wake up. Like, it's just time to wake up. Enough of social media, TikToks going viral on Instagram. We have real life problems and our children depend on us. So we need to wake up. And then to our government, stop the corruption, please. Like, you're stealing from our future and our kids' future. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. We'd move to the two diplomats. Mr. Ismail.
Okay, what I just want to say is Africa is a fast moving and fast changing environment and continent. So please stop reading about Africa, just go meet people, meet its youth, listen to them, hear them. Because it's changing so fast, to keep up with it, you have to continuously engage with African youth.
Thank you. I will not add anything what you say. But just congratulations and thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time and thank you for listening to us. Thank you.
That was a great panel, right? Please give him a round of applause. Wonderful panel. I don't see our moderator for the next panel, Dr. Joseph Musa. I think there she is. Okay, so Dr. Joseph Musa is the moderator for our next panel. And we'll do another 30 minutes, and then when we're done, we'll do a breakout session for 30 minutes to explore this question, take notes, and then we come back here to present the ideas that were collected during the breakout session. Dr. Joseph Musa, thank you.
Excuse me, before we continue, I don't know if we can renegotiate the time and the approach, the initial approach for our forum, because I don't know if we will really follow the agenda as it is, taking into consideration the time. I really would like to participate actively, but because of the time, the point is that the break-up sessions, we are just following the time as if we don't have a time constraint. I don't know if you understand me. So if we can negotiate and reduce the time of, to give more time to participate, I don't know. Just to, think about it.
So the program is already been finalized, and we're sticking with the program. We have one more panel, but we've done those breakout sessions. It's really the opportunity to use the idea that you heard here, include it in the breakout session. And you come back here, you can actually be one of the presenters if you want.
No, that's not the point. It was just to think about the time. Maybe we could reduce a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much, Mr. Mamadou Samba, for emceeing this forum. Our next panel, as you see on your program, is a panel regarding partnerships. And our wonderful speakers, wonderful panelists, are Mr. Sodepo Babajide, who is the employee of Afrique Bank. Mr. Babajide, please have a seat at the stage. And then the next panelist is Mr. Edwin Tambara of Africa Wildlife Foundation, and then followed by my sister Viviane Chinyeri who is also a wonderful person that is working on Future Africa Fund. Please welcome. And then the other person that is in the audience with us is another sister and a colleague, Ms. Kakunze of the African Union Commission. So please come on and join us. Then we'll be joined by our colleague also, IFF, Mr. Thami Poe, who is going to be joining online. Okay. So this panel comes actually as the panel to harness the engagement that we're looking forward to when it comes to the Africa Leaders Summit. As you might have seen, is that we have partnership as part of what is going to be discussed by our leaders, which we talk about partnership that lasts. So that's why we found it very important to have the panelists that have got to do with bringing us together in these issues that we all are discussing and we are passionate about, to see how we all can collaborate and work together to make sure that all our voices are heard and our practices are really meaningful in as far as our engagement of the youth leaders who are the big majority of our population on the continent as well as in the diaspora. So without delay, I'll call upon each panelist to have only 1 minute of introducing yourself and what you do best so that we can engage into the conversation. Mr. Babajide, please have a mic.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, of course, gratitude to the African Union mission in Washington, D.C. for inviting the bank to participate in this very interesting session, and also giving over 40s the opportunity to sit in and listen to this exciting and really clever discussions that have been going on. I work with the Africa Export-Import Bank. It's a multilateral trade finance institution, multilateral in the sense that it was set up by African countries to finance and support trade development on the continent. So we finance trade, we provide advisory support on trade, we do guarantees on trade, we provide access to trade information, and we do just a whole range of things to support trade activities on the continent. And of course, given its implied impact on job creation, employment, wealth creation, and the development of the continent. We're headquartered in Cairo, but we have regional offices. And at the moment, we have 52 African countries that are participating in the bank, either as shareholders or as signatories to our establishment treaties. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I'm Edwin Tambara. I'm from Zimbabwe. I work with the African Wildlife Foundation. It's certainly a privilege for us to be here. A few years ago, you would never find anyone in conservation sitting amongst such a panelist. But for us, conservation is Africa's greatest opportunity. In all the challenges we are talking about, they linked to conservation, and if we get it right there, we stand a chance in what we want to address with climate change, with what we want to address with food security, and so many other issues we have talked about and we are going to talk about. So I lead Africa AWF's work here in the US in engaging the US government from a policy perspective, but also in terms of partnership for conservation programs in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Vivian, please.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Vivian Chinyere Inya.
I work as the head of business management at JP Morgan in our corporate responsibility group, but I'm also a limited partner with Future Africa. It's a fund that focuses on investing in early stage startups across talent, infrastructure, markets, and environment. So happy to be with everybody today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Please come in.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Clelia Kakunzi. I'm from Burundi, and I've been working for the African Union for less than 5 years now. So I work under the cabinet of the chairperson of the African Union Commission, and our team is mostly responsible for all partnerships relationship between the African Union and the institution outside of African Union. For instance, for those who are more familiar with what the Foreign Affairs Ministry does, we're basically the Foreign Affairs unit of the African Union. So we work with the European Union. We're here for the Africa-US Leader Summit. We've also engaged with India, Turkey, and Korea and others partners. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for saving us some time. We appreciate you. And so now we need to delve into our conversation. With this partnership, now this question is going to go to all of you, if you may kindly give your take on it. So when it comes to Youth of Africa, what does it mean for Afrexim's bank's work? What about AWF? What about the Future for Africa Fund and the chairperson's partnership department or unit? This question is really key to the audience to understand how your work plays into the youth's work and aspirations. So if I may start from ladies, I'm so sorry to be biased. Ms. Kakunzi, if you may please unpack what you have for us in as far as youth is concerned and the partnership.
Yes, thank you, Josefa. So I wouldn't, our unit is quite new in the African Union Commission. We've been established for about 10 years ago. But what we have seen in the past 10 years is that we are having more and more youth as staff in the African Union. We've recently enforced the 35% quota to make sure that African youth are employed within African Union. And the way we're going about it is to, of course, make sure that from the recruitment process, if we have, for example, we have different grade for positions. So for all entry-level position, we make sure that there are youth under 35 that actually hold those positions, which wasn't the case for 5 or 10 years ago. When I first started, which was only 5 years ago, entry-level position will be held by senior staff who are 45 to 55 years old. And that's no longer the case. It's the same thing with director level. We make sure that any staff that are over 50 years old no longer is immediately rejected from the system when they apply. So that's one way of doing that. When it comes to partnerships directorate, what we do is, for instance, just now, when we're meeting the leaders next week, we make sure that we have a youth consultation across the continent, but also outside of the continent. Just earlier this year, in fact, we had a AU Summit, AU-EU Summit. It's with the European Union. So what we did is that we made sure that we engaged with the Office of the Youth Envoy, as well as our youth department, to make sure that when we're in Brussels and also in the preparatory process, we engage our youth. So they're not necessarily government representatives, but also outside of
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Vivian, if you may please let us know your work, how it does bring in the youth, more especially in the diaspora.
Yes, definitely. So within the fund, I mentioned there are 4 key areas that are part of the investment thesis. It's talent, infrastructure, markets, and environment. Under the umbrella, we know what's happening across the continent in relation to the rest of the world. The average age on the continent is getting younger. The average age across the rest of the globe is getting younger. What that means, though, is that the investments that we're making today are really, really important on skilling up our students, skilling up young people on the continent, not in traditional models of learning. So that's what's really important. So one of the funds that we have is focused on the future of learning. How do you come up with more innovative models than we have today in the way that people are getting skills? One of the organizations that we've invested in is called Andela. This is really about how do you take people who are, young people who are in their teens, teach them skills around product management, developing, coding, and helping them learn skills that are really valuable in the market today. Lots of organizations like that, and trying to figure out new ways that we can be innovative in the way that kids are learning. The traditional model isn't working, and it's too slow. We can't have people in school for 18 years, and then after all of that, go to uni, and then still end up with no job, right? So a lot of our focus is on innovative models of learning, trying to find different ways in which we can skill people faster and place them in jobs faster. Because as the rest of the world ages and the average age on the continent continues to get younger and younger, we need people to be skilled up, trained up, to be able to take on roles and jobs in faster ways than are happening right now. So that's what the Future of Africa Fund is focused on.
Thank you so much, Vivian. Mr. Tambara, and as I know, you're working hard to make sure that Africa Wildlife Foundation does its job in as far as preserving our continent. How have you brought together the youth to come and be part of the conversation and later become part of the solution?
Thank you. For us, it was an absolute realization that if we do not have meaningful participation of youth in conservation, then we have failed. So as AWF, we really had to invest, first of all, as I mentioned, how do we reposition conservation, not as a sector that's only for Westerners, but it's actually to cultivate that ownership among Africans to say, this is your asset, and what can you do with this asset? And we are gaining ground on that note, and we have seen the interest. Working with the youth, we have looked at how do we create opportunities for young people to come into conservation and view it as a sector where you can actually develop your career. Right now we are working with young Africans, about 18 of them, as policy fellows. They are right now working together with the team, the African Group of Negotiators in the CBD in Montreal, to support them in the position that Africa is advancing in that convention. So there are different ways we are really creating opportunities for African youth to step into decision-making platforms, which is critical for conservation and critical for the future. And we are also looking at how do we create broader opportunities within conservation, how do we open the sector to entrepreneurial ideas from the youth. I think many of us, when you think about conservation and what we can gain from it, we immediately go to tourism. But there's so much that the sector has to offer. There's so many value chains that can be developed that are tied to our natural resources that are there for the youth to explore and develop enterprises that meet the goals of generating income, generating jobs, but also meeting conservation goals. So we are working with partners in that space to actually develop incubation hubs for conservation-related enterprises. And again, it's taking root. People are beginning to see conservation not as a burden, but actually as a sector that holds opportunity. And here in the US, and we are getting there, but we haven't had the opportunity like this to actually interact with the African diaspora. And we would love to, especially some of the ideas that we are hearing. We've been working with parts of the US government, in particular US Congress. Actually, we are in the process of developing with members of Congress a bill that's going to look at creating an African Youth Conservation and Climate Corps, which is aimed at creating jobs and employment for youth in the conservation and green transition sector. So that's another opportunity that we have to create meaningful employment and meaningful economic opportunities for African youth. And definitely it's what we are taking into this US-Africa summit as something that we want Africa and the US to partner on and move together. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for expounding on the involvement of the organization and the African youth, especially those in the diaspora. So the next person, actually, let me first of all move on to online. The IFF representative, Thami, please, if you hear us, please have a word.
Hi. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Unfortunately, you can't see me right now. So in South Africa, we're stuck in something that is called. So for those who don't know, these are periodic blackouts that are happening because, I guess, of the lack of generation capacity here in the country. But it's okay because these are the kind of things we should be discussing as youth, and these are the kind of things we should be solving for anyway within forums such as these. Anyway, my name is Thami Foro. We're based here in South Africa, and I'm representing the Chikovic Family Foundation. And we are a philanthropic organization that has philanthropic investments in STEM and education all over the continent. But also some of our programs and projects exist within the citizenship and policy development space, and which is where we have our relationship with the African Union Office of the Youth Envoy, our relationship with them there. So I think the big contribution from my end, if I can just maybe delve into some of the substantive things I would want to talk about. My big contribution is around this project that we've been running, our flagship project called the African Youth Survey. And I'll contextualize it behind this statement. I think what's important for creating partnerships, and I'm just as our esteemed colleagues just throughout the panels have been saying, is what's important is curating ecosystems of development. Because I think organizations, entities, cannot do what they want to achieve by themselves, but need to acknowledge that there's a network of other organizations and individuals with influence, capital, and all sorts of resources, that exist that can help augment some of these goals that we have. And so, where we fit into this conversation is through this thing we call the African Youth Survey. I think over and over again, as we've been, speaking about throughout the dialogues today, we keep talking about the fact that African youth are an opportunity for the continent. They're not an opportunity by default. So just because we have, one of the panelists said, just because we have the biggest youth population in the world here on the continent does not necessarily mean that we will have economic growth. That is absolutely true. But if you look at it from an optimistic point of view, you will then be compelled to develop a policy position that leverages this youth opportunity that exists here on the continent. And our first intervention is what is called the African Youth Survey, right? Because if we have this huge demographic of young people on the continent, why don't we actually engage them? So the survey itself seeks to engage African young people on their concerns, on their aspirations, on their hopes and dreams for the continent that they live in. And we survey young people across a number of items, including a notion called Afro-optimism. So how optimistic are young people about the future of the continent? We interviewed people around COVID-19, democratic ambitions, the environment, connectivity and media, employment, all sorts of things, right? And throughout, this, we released our second survey now in 2022. And by now we would have interviewed 4,500 young people on the continent, across 14 countries, right? So it's a very, very, very important intervention, we believe, for the purposes of policy intervention and design, because it's built so that young people can actually have a meaningful voice in rooms such as these. But then the next step from the survey is actual meaningful policy consideration. Because it's one thing to come up with this fantastic document where you have all of these findings around connectivity and media and all sorts of interesting statistics that we can share, after this engagement through the through Chido and her team, right? But we have developed a process, we piloted a process of meaningful dialogue here in South Africa with the AU Office of the Youth Envoy, us as IFF, and the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation, Kgalema Motlanthe being the former president of South Africa, where we called on esteemed young people such as those that are in the room today, who have traction in specific areas of intervention that the South African Country Report speaks about. So things like education, entrepreneurship, and democracy and justice, right? And we got these young people in a room to think about South Africa as an individual country. Think about South Africa and the South Africa that we find ourselves today. So marry ourselves to the problem that we're seeing. Secondly, to ideate a policy direction.
Dami, your time is up. I want to acknowledge that we have the survey reports distributed in the audience. So what we're going to do is we're going to follow each and everything, and then if people have some questions for you, they'll definitely have to reach you using the information that you laid on the survey, so that the questions can be answered. We really appreciate the contribution. We need to go on to the next panelist. Mr. Babajide, please, if you may please take the mic.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Moderator. So in terms of Afreximbank and what we do to encourage and support the youth, of course, as you can imagine, it's not like we convene meetings, to discuss. So it's not really about invite talk, and it's really from our side about ensuring that our financing and that the support that we can provide, gets to the youth. Of course, traditionally, historically, right, in terms of the trade finance interventions and the other investments that we make, it wasn't as if we said, okay, if we're going to give money, we will not be giving money to people under the age of 40, right? So, but what we discovered is that in the profile of companies, right, that usually are able to access the kind of finance that we provided, we discovered that these companies tend to be very large, very well-established companies, which typically they are not usually youth-owned, right? Because of course, if you look at big companies all over the world, apart from maybe tech, if you check either the main participants or all that, the youth proportion is usually small. Sometimes because of course capital has to do with time, accumulation of capital over time, and so on and so forth. So it became clear that for us to be able to support youth enterprises and these types of enterprises, we had to come up with a specific structured program which will enable financing of different sorts to be able to reach the youth. And of course, we found what I would say are two golden spots, if I may put it that way. First spot is SMEs. You can be assured that every youth that starts a business is going to start up as an SME, one way or the other, right? And you will discover, of course, that the large bulk or the majority of youth involved in business, involved in entrepreneurship, are fairly in the SME space. So to that extent, the bank developed what it called its SME development program, which looked at providing financing, capacity building, access, market access and policy advocacy for SMEs, but knowing fully well that the main or the key beneficiaries will be youth. So financing, what do we mean? We discovered fairly quickly that financing isn't just for money to be useful to an SME. It has to be the right kind of financing. So we have products that look at providing long-term capital, products that look at providing short-term working capital. We also have products that look at maybe some of the more risky, adventurous type supports. We have some funds dedicated in a venture capital kind of format for financing that that is the most appropriate kind of that is the most appropriate kind of financing for. And in terms of getting our financing to the SMEs, because of our nature as a multilateral bank, it's not as if we can open branches everywhere on the continent. What we do is that we work with local banks and local intermediaries. So we have a network of banks all across the continent whom we have or whom we are on lending funds to, who will then make sure that the funds hopefully get to the SMEs, given the right kind of profile for the companies and all that. Now, what we now discovered also was that if you want to help youth-owned businesses, money is not enough. Meaning, for the average SME, starting up on a business, incredible ideas, you give them $1 million, you can be sure that that business will still fail, right? And that quite often it's not really about money; it's about capacity building. And broadly speaking, when we say capacity building, it covers a whole range of things, right? You may be a brilliant designer, but it doesn't make you a very good businessman, or very good with numbers, or very good with financial planning, financial investment. You might be an incredible programmer or technologist, but it doesn't mean you know how to run a business, right? Which often comes with time, with experience, with practice, and so on and so forth. So as part of our SME development program, we also have resources dedicated to capacity building, where we have a number of programs where we ensure that SMEs and businesses get exposed to different kind of information, different kind of skills that will help them to be more effective businesses. Thirdly, market access. What we then discovered again was that even if you give businesses the money, you give them the training, if they don't have markets to sell their products to, well, then they will also still what? They will still fail. So in that regard, the bank has some initiatives focused on making sure that SMEs have market access. For example, we have the Intra-Africa Trade Fair, which is fully focused on that. And then, of course, last but not the least, policy advocacy, where we discover that beyond all the things we provide, it's still important for government to put in place the right policies and the right regulations to make sure that SMEs and youth-owned businesses succeed. So to that extent, as an example, we have what we call a digital policy working group, where we actually convene startups and others in the digital space to work on policies and regulations to provide recommendations to governments in terms of what will work best for enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you. I can see the MC is walking towards me to say, hey, let's conclude this. But we can have 30 seconds for each and every panelist to give us the success story of the youth that you have engaged and what you see this forum for the summit for AU Africa leaders coming up next week. What are your expectations? Within 30 seconds, if we can be able to make it, please let's do it. Let's start from the person that has had a mic. Please, if you can obey the
right, 30 seconds.
Instructions.
So last year, we, in collaboration with NEPAD, we ran what we call a growth accelerator program, right, targeting healthcare startups. And there were 2 healthcare startups in East Africa who participated and won one in Uganda, one in Kenya, and we're able to award them, some significant grants to push their company. Of course, we didn't put age requirements, but it so happened that the startups were led and owned by youth. So I'll say that's an example of where you give youth an opportunity to compete, to show what they're capable of. They'll certainly get what they deserve. In terms of expectations from the summit, we think it's really important that the discussions do not sort of stay up in the air, as it happens quite often, but that really there will be tangible outcomes, tangible conclusions, and tangible interventions which not just the youth, but the entirety of the continent will be able to benefit from. 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very